Hi, I'm Jake Novak, and this is the latest edition of the Analysts. And I got to tell you, it seems like every time, even though we don't go very long between every episode, we have a year's worth of news in between just the 4, 5, 6 days in between the times that we put this show together. So obviously that's exciting for putting together a current and interesting program and getting very early commentary on it. At the same time, you can't be happy with a lot of the results. Now, if you are a Donald Trump fan, if you are a Republican, if you're someone who wants to see change in the White House, and I guess in the Senate as well, it's been a very interesting 22, 23 days. It's hard to believe that that debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden was actually just 22 days ago, to correct myself. 22 days ago. And in those 22 days ever since, it feels like a massive house of cards has been falling every day for the Democrats with very little corresponding damage or problems for Donald Trump and the Republicans. Just since the debate, we have learned that basically the other half of America that didn't recognize that Joe Biden was not cognitively able for the job has now figured that out. Now, we talked about that on the last edition of The Analyst, and I said it very, very clearly, again, not with hyperbole, but just with clarity, and I think with consensus, certainly with consensus, actually, that the president of the United States is senile. That's not a scandal. That's an emergency. Now, yes, there are scandalous aspects to it, and yes, there are campaign strategy aspects to it. But first and foremost, it's an emergency. Now, that happened after we already had for more than 2 years another emergency in this country, which is a wide open border, which again, until Texas Governor Greg Abbott started busing some of those migrants into the blue cities, there was a narrative that this wasn't an emergency, that it wasn't a crisis. But since he started doing that more than 2 years ago, the nation has woken up to the realities of the national emergency that is our open border. So that's 2 that we've had going on. Now we have number 3. After the assassination attempt on Donald Trump on Saturday, we have now learned as a country, and again, there's consensus on this. This is not a right-wing point or a left-wing point. We now have consensus in this country that the Secret Service is either completely inept or basically unable to do the job or corrupt. That too, my friends, is not a scandal. Obviously, there are scandalous aspects of it. But that too, my friends, is a national emergency. Either the Secret Service is picking and choosing which politicians it's going to protect properly, which would be very highly corrupt and very, very dangerous, or it's just completely inept, which means all of our elected leaders, all of our important officials are in physical, mortal danger. That is indeed a national emergency. So that's 3. Senile president, open borders, inept or corrupt Secret Service. Now, I would throw in one more, again, something that I've talked about in some of my other writings for many years, which is that we have an increasing and very dangerous Iranian infiltration into our State Department and this White House. We have a pro-Iranian foreign policy for the most part, which is a national emergency because Iran means to destroy the United States and to kill its people, both here and abroad. So here we are in the midst of a presidential election with 4 national emergencies running concurrently. How's that working out for us? Have a nice day. It's not going well. And you know, the whole point of The Analyst was to dispassionately, intelligently analyze, critique, give thumbs up and thumbs down to certain campaign strategies, to campaign speeches, talk about better things that could be done, talk about what you really can learn from the polls and what the polls are telling you or not telling you. And we're still going to do all of those things. But this election is going on in the midst of 4 national emergencies. Now, many of you may remember 4 years ago, we were told the election was being held during the national emergency of COVID. Now, I'm not saying COVID wasn't a major gut punch to this country, but of course it was mostly self-inflicted. We shut down way more than we needed to do. We demonized each other way more than we needed to do. We did a lot of things wrong, and we turned it into much worse than it had to be. This, on the other hand, we seem to be playing down. The president of the United States is senile, and 90% of the discussion about this national emergency situation is whether or not he should leave the ticket and who should replace him. And what are we waiting for? We need to replace a president who's not cognitively able. Forget about the campaign for 1 second. My goodness. We have a Secret Service that it seems to be some kind of collusion or the worst ineptitude we've ever seen at the levels of the Secret Service. That's a national emergency. People are talking about that regularly, and they are talking about it, I think, in the context of how serious it is, but maybe not as serious as they should be. Is there anyone saying that the Republican convention should have been shut down because the Secret Service can't be trusted? Is anyone saying that nobody should be making any campaign appearances because the Secret Services can't be trusted? Is there anyone saying that all the members of Congress and elected leaders should go hide somewhere because the Secret Service can't be trusted? No. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what should be done, but why are we waiting for hearings with the Secret Service? I don't care if Congress is out of session. Why are we waiting for action now? Folks, you can't really run this election and talk about this election without understanding that we are in the midst of these emergencies. Now, we will continue on in this particular edition of The Analyst and talk about all the other aspects of this election. But I'm going to ask both of my guests just off the top about their feelings about this, because I think that the greatest sin in journalism, whether it's opinion journalism or straight journalism, doesn't matter, is ignoring elephants in the room. I hate when people do that. For example, I told you on this edition on an earlier edition of The Analyst that the first question of the presidential debate back on June 27th should have been, Mr. Biden, Mr. Trump, the overwhelming majority of the American people would rather have somebody else running besides the two of you. How do you respond to that? Because that's what people are thinking when they turn on the TV. Oh, these two guys again? Now, since then, there's been some strong movement to Donald Trump, absolutely. But still, I'm sure we all have someone that we have a dream candidate for most of us that we'd rather have rather than Biden and Trump. And if we don't, that's fine, but we all understand that we're dealing with some flawed people here. No problem with that. That's why it's politics and not going to church or synagogue or whatever. Obviously, we know the difference. But folks, we are in the midst of 4 concurrent national emergencies, all going on at the same time. That's what concurrent means. I know most of you know that. And we have to deal with it. We have to talk about it. And we can't make the campaign more important than dealing with these emergencies. Luckily, the campaign can help us solve some of them. If there's a candidate who addresses the emergencies clearly, and I think there's one who is and one who isn't, but okay, then of course, at least we're addressing the issue. But for the most part, I think that we're pretending like these things aren't happening or acting as if they're not happening. And that's not good. When we come back, we're going to bring on our first guest who's going to talk about all of this and from a perspective of not only this, but talk about what happened at the Republican National Convention this week, talk about that new generation that the Republicans are looking for. The Democrats are too. Everyone's looking for a new generation in politics, but I think we saw that in the Republican National Convention in a couple of major examples. We'll be right back here on The Analyst. Please stay with us.
Ready to up your game and learn more about the thrilling world of sports betting? Introducing Double Down with Breslo, the ultimate podcast about the business of sports gambling. Join me, James Breslo, and a long list of expert guests as we dive into the art and science of the sports betting industry. Evolving regulations, technology enhancements, and the meteoric rise in the number of players makes this sector the fastest growing and most intriguing in the world. Unlock the business secrets from many of the industry's most recognizable C-suite executives, including famous odds makers and influencers. Every episode of Double Down with Breslo is packed with insider tips, deeply skilled analysis, and in-depth discussions. Don't miss out on the ultimate resource for mastering the business of sports betting. Listen to Double Down with Breslo on the Evergreen Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's Double Down with Breslo, the business of sports betting podcast.
Welcome back to this edition of The Analyst with Jake Novak, and I'm going to bring in our first very special guest, who's Justine Brooke Murray. She's a political commentator. And Justine, I want to start with what I was talking about. Again, I'm not trying to be frightening to people. I'm not trying to be apocalyptic, but it's just important that I think, again, the biggest sin in journalism, whether it's opinion journalism or straight journalism, is to ignore elephants in the room. And as I just laid out to the viewers, we are in the midst of 4 national emergencies right now. A president who is senile, a Secret Service that's either inept or corrupt, a wide open border for multiple years right now, and an Iran infiltrated State Department and White House. Before we get into talking about the RNC, before we get into talking about JD Vance, before we get into talking about the polls, Justine, how do you, I mean, are you cognizant of this every day? Do you think about this every day? And is this something that you can do and think about without being completely distracted? And does this distract your ability to talk about how the election is going as if it were all normal?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I work in New York, and every day now, maybe this is just because I'm paranoid, but every day I go in the Lincoln Tunnel, I go on the subway, I'm worried that there's going to be another terrorist attack to the scale that we've seen on 9/11, because we are so susceptible right now. As you mentioned, our borders are wide open. You have Iran knowing that President Biden taking advantage of the fact that our president, along with all of our other enemies, are taking advantage of the fact that our president is senile. He doesn't know where he is. He belongs in the nursing home. I actually believe that the president being senile, that's the worst of the four national emergencies you mentioned, because all those other emergencies are become even more escalated when we have a president who doesn't know what he's doing. So then that begs the question, okay, of course, Trump supporters, the Republican Party, to have a president who's senile, have President Trump run against Biden, that would be great in President Trump's favor. But then we have to think, we have until January for Iran to do something, for Iran to nuke us at 3 a.m. And then we have a president who he can't work between after the hours of 11 a.m. to, I believe he said 8 p.m. That's really scary. So we have to focus on the issue of, okay, do we want President Biden to run against President Trump, hoping that President Trump will win and beat him and that raises his chances? Or are we in dire straits right now and we cannot afford to have President Biden in office, even if President Trump wins again, because something might happen before January?
That's right. No, I mean, I think that one of the things that we're hearing in some of these trial balloons that are going out is that Joe Biden would step down from the ticket, but he would remain president, which is going to be a very, very tough sell. I mean, even the regime news media, I think one or two of the journalists might ask the following question, and certainly the more honest journalists will ask the question. You're telling me that this guy isn't fit and strong enough to give a few teleprompter speeches and go to a couple rallies, but he's okay to be president for the next 6 months? We're talking about 6 months here of a presidency. You know, the term is only 4 years. 6 months is a significant chunk, okay? That's an eighth of the presidency. That's 12.5%. Think if you had an investment that went down 12.5% in a day. That'd be a nice, huge bite out of your money, okay? So think of it that way. I wholeheartedly agree. And to me, it's interesting. These are terrible scandals that have been going on for a long time. It seems, though, that this is the one that, of course, is going to bring him down. And I think, and I'd love to hear your thought on this. Now, you already said you think because it makes all the other ones worse. I think another reason why it's so bad is because it's so darn easy to understand. You know, the funny thing about scandals are, no matter how bad they are, for the most part, they can be pretty confusing. We still don't know what the heck those burglars were doing at the Watergate that night. We don't know. There's theories here and there, but there's absolutely no documented history about what the heck they were doing there. We don't know when the president knew and when he knew. We never got the answer to that question, actually. And that's a hard one to understand. The Monica Lewinsky scandal, easier to understand, but not so easy to talk about and not as relatable. What's really relatable is, listen, we've all had people in our family who've slowed down, who've gotten old, who've gotten sick. So it's easy to understand, it's relatable, and it encompasses so many people. It's not just the administration, it's the Democrats in Congress. It's not just them, it's the regime news media. It's not just them, it's influencers on social media, and the list goes on and on and on. I was wondering, if you were watching the Republican National Convention this week, though, it just seemed like they were there to push their agenda pretty much. And Donald Trump, very much like Ronald Reagan in 1980, only mentioned Joe Biden's name in one instance. I think he said it twice, but it was in the same sentence. So I wanted to get your thought on that. Do you think that the Republican National Convention, the message there, the messengers there, did the right thing in not pounding the table even on this terrible scandal, this terrible national emergency?
Certainly. They don't need to pound the table. President Trump, and this is why I believe he actually, up until the rally on Saturday where he was nearly assassinated, he was holding back a little bit. He was letting President Biden screw himself over and over again, because President Trump, as big as a personality he has, I believe even he recognized within the past couple of weeks since the debate that he doesn't need to do anything or say anything that will make President Biden look worse than he actually does right now. The truth is the most important thing. And I'm actually really happy President Trump recognized that. I'm really happy that at the RNC speech, at least the first 30 minutes of his speech, it was about unity. And we saw this entire week that he was a changed man. If you saw the first night where he walked in with the bandage on his ear, like a real trooper, a real strong fighter who we need, he looked very emotional. And for the first time, maybe not for the first time, but for maybe the longest time in one period, we've seen not just the President Trump, we've seen not just the leader and the fighter Trump, we've seen the man himself.
Okay, let's do a little bit of rapid fire stuff, because I want to make sure you get a number of points. First of all, give me your best 30 seconds or so on the RNC overall. What would you give it as a report card? I don't know how many conventions you've seen. You're younger than I am, but that's important because we really want the young perspective. But as a young person just looking at an event, how would you grade the RNC? What would be, if you A through F?
A minus.
Okay, and why A minus? Obviously pretty good. So tell us those pretty good things, and then maybe the thing that stopped it from getting an A or an A plus.
I like the focus on unity. I think that there needed to be some more young people. However, we did see that on stage with Chavez Kirstenbaum, a Harvard student suing the university. I do like the focus on the working class, farmers. However, I think we should have had a little bit more of a bigger focus on crime, on the cities. And they had the day of Make America Safe Again. I think we needed to hone that in even more.
Now, let's talk about J.D. Vance. Obviously, from your standpoint, you don't see him as someone who's as young as you are. But for the American public, this is the youngest person on a presidential ticket since Richard Nixon. Extremely young man running for office. What was your take on him? I mean, did you feel that he spoke to a younger group, or was it more of a geographical thing? I wonder if J.D. Vance they're talking too much about his age and not enough about the fact that he comes from a geographical point of the country. What's your thought on that?
Actually, I think his focus on the geographical I think they focused more on that than his age. They just focused on, oh, look how great he's younger than usual. He's very young, but they could have honed in on how younger conservatives are actually more conservative than older members of the Republican Party. He is very big on the idea that America cannot just become, our allies cannot become welfare recipients of our country. Even though he's a big supporter of Israel, we hear a lot of tiptoeing, walking on eggshells when we speak about funding towards Ukraine. And I think this is what makes J.D. Vance great. He speaks about issues that normally that the Republican Party we're too afraid to speak about. We're too afraid to talk about abortion. We're too afraid to talk about. Now we're suddenly doing it with, we're criticizing the fact that our media and our politicians want to allow young kids to become trans. Mm-hmm. But these issues where we're too afraid to discuss before, younger conservatives are not afraid to discuss those issues. And that's where J.D. Vance represents us.
All right, Justine, I really enjoyed speaking with you. I unfortunately we have to cut this now a little bit shorter than I wanted to, but we're going to get back to you soon at another time. Thank you so much for commenting, especially about the national emergency aspect of this. And thank you so much for your comments about the Republican National Convention. We will have you back on again. You are a fantastic guest, and it's so important. I think, and by far the youngest that we've had, and God knows the analyst needs to get younger. So thank you so much for everything that you've done, and have a great weekend, and stick with us, because you're going to definitely join us again. When we come back, we're going to talk foreign policy. We're going to talk about the Democrats. What do they do now after this convention? And we'll be right back with that. Thank you.
What does it mean to be a leader?
It's taking my first solo flight.
At the University of North Dakota, we lead our own way.
Welcome back to the Analysts with Jake Novak. I'm Jake Novak. It has been several years worth of news stories just in the last few days since our last edition of the Analysts. That's the way it's been going all year, and that's the way it's been going ever since we started this program. Our next guest is James Breslo. He's got a lot of things on his resume. He is the host of the Hidden Truth podcast, but he's also a political commentator. He's been published on Fox. He's been published in a lot of different publications. You've seen him on the air, and he's also an attorney. We're going to talk to him about domestic politics. We're going to talk to him about foreign policy, all that kind of stuff. But the first thing we want to talk about, James, we've been spending our entire time so far in this edition of the Analyst talking about the Republicans, the Republican National Convention, all that kind of stuff. Let's talk first now about the Democrats. Now, I started the program again with my exhortation to everyone to remember that the president of the United States is a consensus issue. The president of the United States is senile. That's not a scandal. That's a national emergency. It's a national emergency with scandalous elements to it, but we must discuss that. And I often talk about how we have to discuss that first before we start playing the political card game and the replacement game. So first, we're going to do both. James, I'm going to ask you to do first. First of all, let's just hear what you think about, again, the fact is, again, undisputed fact. We have a president of the United States who's not cognitively able. There is no real disputing of that anymore. I consider that to be a national emergency that we should talk about first before we talk about elections and electoral colleges and polls. Love to get your take on that.
Well, great to be on your show, and happy to chat with everybody. And you're right; these are incredible times. I mean, I kind of step back and just think about how great America's founding was and how great our Constitution is. The fact that we've had this assassination attempt and we're about to yank the current president off as the Democrat nominee, and nobody seems to things continue. Everybody's kind of nonplussed about the whole thing, and on America goes, despite these incredibly extraordinary times that we find ourselves in, and the country's holding up just fine, which kind of segs into your question about Biden. I, for one, was not someone who was surprised in any way by his debate performance. I was overseas at the time, so I got the commentary before I saw the debate. So I was expecting something way worse than I saw. And what I saw was Joe Biden, because I am a Republican and we do what Republicans like to do. We do send memes around of Joe Biden slip-ups. So I've been watching this for a long time. So none of this surprised me. So this is the way the government has been run, indefinitely, essentially since Biden became president. It is a shadow presidency. With some digging, we'd find out exactly who behind the scenes is really calling the shots. But, I don't think Biden is as diminished perhaps as you do, but God forbid he be given another 4 years, because he ain't going to get any better. So without question, he should be taken off as a nominee for the Democrat Party. They're not going to win with him, clearly, and they need to replace him for that reason. As far as his mental capacity, I don't think he's as bad as others say he is. I mean, he mumbles and bumbles and fumbles, but I still think he understands the basics. He's basically at Kamala level. Okay. So I think he and Kamala are about the same level. He used to be here, and now he's coming down to Kamala's level.
All right. So we've checked that box. So now let's play the parlor game. Let's talk about it. I'm going to give you what I think the scenario has been, and I think what the best path, in my opinion, for the Democrats is, and I'd love to get your take on it. I think the Democrats have spent every day since the debate coming to the two concurrent conclusions, which are terrible for them. One is that Biden can't win. And the second conclusion is that it's extremely, extremely, extremely difficult to replace him. Not impossible, but if and when they do, it still won't be without a lot of sacrifice. I think the easiest path for them is to understand that basically, and again, not to be overconfident, I'm not predicting a landslide, nothing like that. But in my analysis, the Democratic Party, doesn't matter who they put up for president, their brand is destroyed. They cannot win this election. So they need to figure out how to reduce the damage. I think they reduce the damage by making Kamala not only the nominee, but I would advise them to make her the president for a few months before the election to give her some experience, quote unquote. That stops a civil war within the party. People will have to kind of swallow that hard. She's the vice president. That's the way it's going to go. And then I think for the running mate position, it's not going to be a Gavin Newsom. It's not going to be a Pritzker. It's not going to be any one of these other people who have future hopes within the party, because it's a loser. So they know it's a loser ticket. They know they're losing. Might be close, but they know they're losing. So it's going to be somebody, an elder statesman person, probably someone with the foreign policy experience, maybe someone who'd recently retired, somebody like that who really has nothing to lose, but will provide some level of experience to the ticket. So I don't think it's going to be a Gavin Newsom. I don't think it's going to be Michelle Obama. I think Michelle Obama has great disdain for being with people in the public. I'm not talking about the American people. I don't think she likes to be out in public. I think she faked it for 8 years. So I think it's ridiculous to consider her as a candidate. So that's my thought. I think they know they're going to lose. They need to try to save some of the money that's been donated to the ticket. That's what they get when she stays on it. They get some money to put down the ballot, and they get somebody, an elder statesman person who has absolutely no personal future aspirations to be the vice presidential nominee, so they can sort of cover their butts. James, let me know what you think about all that.
Yeah, well, I do believe that it's too late. They can't go back to supporting Biden. All of them are on record now of saying that this guy can't be president for another 4 years, right? So they've made their bed at this point. So even though I think it is still going to be hard to wrangle this, Biden still appears to be fighting. Apparently announced today, I'm heading back out on the campaign trail. So he's still not going quietly. But I do think ultimately enough pressure will be put to bear on him that he will have to step aside, because it's a total disaster if he's the guy on the ticket for them after all the top Dems, Biden, Obama, et cetera, are already on record as basically saying that, he can't do this. So, but I don't know all that's involved in doing this. I'm not sure anybody really fully involved. I'm not sure if it's really ever happened before, but it does seem to me an incredible waste of time, energy, and effort to do all you got to do to replace Biden, to simply replace him with Kamala Harris, whose approval rating, I think, is at the same level, if not worse than Biden. So you're not going from a possible winning ticket, a guaranteed losing ticket to a possible winning ticket. You're going from guaranteed losing to guaranteed losing with very marginal benefits. I think you pointed out what the limited benefits would be. And if that's all they can do, then I guess that's all they can do. But I personally would never underestimate their hatred for Trump. They're remember, he's an existential threat. Hopefully they're not going to continue to say that now that somebody tried to kill him, perhaps because he was told again and again, this guy's an existential threat to America. But that's what they claim their view is of Trump. And we know Trump derangement syndrome still runs strong in the Democrat Party. So it would surprise me if they would be willing to just kind of give up winning that they're just going to worry about the down ballot. So my personal theory, or what I would do if I was them, is I would be looking at some of those Midwestern governors, Pennsylvania governor, Michigan governor, Illinois governor, Kentucky governor, because if you can pull that off, and I don't know all that's involved in pulling that off, but if you could pull that off as a Republican, it strikes a little bit of fear into me. If you could pull that off quick enough and unify and then have a debate and then do well in the debate, because I don't think Trump was that great in that debate either, by the way. So you put up a meat and potatoes Democrat governor. I'm not sure that the Dems are capable of putting up an old school Democrat. There aren't many left. But if they were, that would concern me.
No, I mean, I think you make a good point. Obviously, there's no point in ever being overconfident in an election. And I don't think that even with the most popular common sense candidate running for any party, we're ever going to see a 1980 or 84 style, or even a 1988 style landslide ever again in this country. So I'm with you there. I get it. I just do believe, though, however, that the brand of the Democrats right now, and I talked about this with our previous guest, the problem is there's 4 concurrent national emergencies that are also scandalous that are going on right now. The senility of the president, to whatever degree, I think you believe it's not as severe as I do, but still, we both agree that he can't be president for another 4 years. You have a Secret Service that's either completely inept or corrupt. Either way, that's a national emergency. I'm sorry, it just is. You have an open border. That's been a national emergency for years now. And I also believe you have a Middle East situation. I think you have an Iranian infiltration into this government right now with a lot of different evidence of that. also during the Obama administration. But it's interesting, though. It's going to be this cognitive ability scandal. It has been that has caused the most damage. And the reason, as I said with our previous guest, is very simple. It's a simple scandal. It's easy to understand. We've all seen it. It encompasses the entire party, the entire regime news media. And because of that, I think that they're really, really wounded. And unfortunately for them, it's happening in the election year. You know, Watergate happened 72 through 74. Nixon steps down in 74. The Republicans get their butts kicked in the midterm elections that November. But by 1976, there was enough space between that and the presidential election. And anyone who looks at what the trend during the 76 election knows, if they know anything about polls, if that election had taken place 2 weeks later, Gerald Ford wins. That's how close it was, and that's how the momentum was going. So they don't have any of those things going for them. It's happening right now. It's unfolding in real time. It's July, for crying out loud, and it's really happening right now. But one of the people that people talk about, and I don't know if you think he would do really well, so that's my next question, is Gavin Newsom. What if he's the guy they put on the top of the ticket? Now, I am very much against people who think he's going to be a disaster. I think he's nasty, which Democrat voters like, and he's obviously younger and is a pretty decent speaker. What's your assessment of him being a Californian yourself, or at least knowing a lot about California?
Well, yeah, I mean, now we're talking about a second Californian, because obviously Kamala is also a Californian. And by the way, that has been another thought that's been in my head, is this whole concern that, oh, gee, we can't skip over Kamala, Black female, yada, yada. But one of my thoughts is, well, why doesn't she just retain the position as VP? So you come in somebody above, and she's going to be this person's vice president, and we have continuity in that regard. So that could be the answer to that. I think that Newsom is he's a tremendous politician. He's, he looks like a politician. He acts like a politician. He talks like a politician. That's anti-Trump. Trump is the anti-politician. I think the reason that Trump has done so well is that he doesn't speak like a politician. His two big things is putting America first and speaking plainly to the people. Those are the things that caused me to gravitate toward Trump, despite mean tweets and this, that, and the other. Coming off of the 8 years of Obama not putting America first, it was refreshing to hear a guy talk about putting America first, and Obama, the consummate politician, and then just the plain speak of Trump. So you certainly would have a big contrast there between Newsom and Trump. Now, we got a little bit of a preview, if anybody saw the debate between Newsom and DeSantis. And I did see that debate, and I thought, and I think most people did, I'm biased, of course, but I do think that most people thought that DeSantis handily beat him. Perhaps the crowning moment was he pulled out the poop map of San Francisco and pointed out that Newsom cleaned up the poop, not for the people of San Francisco, but for the communist leader of China. That's who he cleaned up the streets of San Francisco for. Not for its residents, but for the communist leader that came to town. And his answer to that was so smug. He basically says, well, when you have people over to your house, you fix up the house, don't you? Full on admits that that's what he was doing. So I think he plays marginally in California. Even Californians are getting quite tired of him. I don't think he plays well in the swing states that he would need to play well in. I think he's just too slick, and it's too easy to hang all of California's problems on him, because most can and should be hung on him. The most basic and obvious being that for the first time in the state's history, more people are leaving the most beautiful state in the country than are coming to the most beautiful state in the country. Why is that? We know what it is. They're moving to Texas. Texas, no offense to Texans, but it ain't that beautiful. Certainly not compared to California. So no, I think they'd be making a mistake to pick him, and then obviously you'd have two Californians on the ballot if it was Kamala with him, which is usually a bad idea. And also California is obviously not a swing state, so you don't get the advantage there.
I think California is an important topic and is an important base for my next point, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It's become incredibly obvious ever since Biden's collapse of the debate. And by the way, I'm with you. For all, Biden's been president for 3 years and change. His performance at the debate wasn't even in the top 10 worst performances of his public speeches in those 3 years. I don't know where everyone's been. And it was still a bad performance, of course, but still, I totally agree with you there. But one of the things that's become painfully obvious for the Democrats is they have a terribly, terribly thin bench. They don't have a lot of people in the works. And I think the reason is simple. The Democrats, their leading politicians, the politicians they have who have the most seniority, are coming from these one-party blue states where they are never challenged. Let's think about this in a free market type of way. Imagine a company that has done business in a country where they're a total monopoly and then trying to compete in a free market. They really are hampered. You have Kamala Harris in a one-party state, never really challenged. I mean, she had to do what she had to do to get the Democratic Party to approve her. But once she got that approval, there was no real competition in the public eye. Same thing with Gavin Newsom. I mean, honestly, and same thing with New York, same with Massachusetts, same thing with Illinois. These are one-party states where there is no forging of steel in fire for any real good candidate. And even if you come from a deeply red state, even if you come from a Tennessee, a Texas, one of these kinds of states, the national news media is on your butt all the time, and that helps you become a better candidate and a stronger bench warmer, for lack of a better word. So I wonder if you see the same problem. I think this is actually the inherent problem. This is the essential problem that the Democrats have. They don't have people who have actually gone through preseason games or actual practice, contact practice, with pads and helmets.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. I mean, obviously there's hills and troughs, and who knows, we might just be in a down period with them for no reason whatsoever. But I would make a couple other observations. One is, I mean, let's be honest, you've got a schism in that party. I mean, the socialists are trying to pull it, the progressives, which are socialists, are trying to take control of that party, and they appear to be winning. Bernie Sanders was this close to beating Hillary Clinton. Then he was this close to beating Joe Biden. And Joe Biden had to make a lot of concessions to him and to get him to step out of the race. So, I'm convinced there's a lot of Bernie pros that are basically in this administration that are part of calling the shots. We also know there's a lot of Obama folks, and, Obama is definitely very far left. So, the ability of an old school Democrat to really rise to the top right now, there probably is a lot of really good qualified ones, but they can't really speak their mind. They think what's going on in their own party is freaking nutso. They can't say it publicly, but I speak to plenty of Democrats who privately say their party has gone, it's off its rocker and it needs to be brought back, but everybody's afraid to say it because they'll come out and cancel you for saying it. There's a total fear within that party to really speak about what's going on, that the party is being hijacked by the progressive / socialists. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wanted to get in two more questions because we're running out of time. So two quick questions. The first is just going off what you just said. There's a clear, I think, evidence in this election right now among that I hate to call them progressive because they're actually regressive. They're bringing us back to the failed Communist Party policies and socialist policies of the past. But that far left, the squad, I think that there is growing evidence that the squad looks at this election as a win-win situation. Either they win the election in November, great, they get their Democrats in the White House, or they lose, and then they can blame what's ever left of the establishment Democratic Party for losing it, and they can get more control of the party overall. What are your quick thoughts on that?
That's a great thought, and I think that is probably a quite likely assessment of what could happen. And a lot of your discussion has been very smart in this conversation about Democrats not just being focused on 2024 but beyond, because if they lose the next 12 years, that's a real problem for them. But if they're able to make it another one-term Trump presidency, well, look what Biden was able to do to what Trump did in 4 years. I mean, he reversed it literally day one, and look at the border now compared to when Trump took office. It's way worse than when Trump took office. So these guys can work very quickly. So I do agree with you that I think they're very focused on not just 2024, but what 28 is going to look like.
James Breslo, we talked during the break about something. I'd like just to finish up on this edition of the Analysts. You had seen some of our episodes, and you thought that my analysis, my hypothesis, my complaint that America has all these great pre-game and post-game NFL analysis shows where some of the people are biased, but it doesn't matter. It's so in depth. You actually learn something, and they're much more honest compared to our political analyst shows where there's dishonesty, where there's, I think, a lot of stupidity, a lot of ignorance. I mean, let's face it. And of course, their bias takes over so much of what they talk about. But you have a theory as to why we get better football analysis than political analysis. I'd love to hear it.
Well, I do think that most political analysts are paying attention to where their next paycheck is coming from. So if you don't toe the party line, you ain't getting that paycheck. And having been on Fox and et cetera, I know, I don't know if people know this, but 95% of the people that appear on Fox are not getting paid by Fox. It's only if you're well, you know this better than I do, but it's only if you're a Fox contributor that you get paid. So people just go on there to promote themselves, basically, because they're not getting paid. And by speaking in a certain way, you are promoting yourself for a position, either with a Republican candidate or the party, or Democrat and the party. And if you're somebody known for speaking, more in the middle, that is not helpful to your career. So what it really takes is more career journalists like a Chris Wallace, who can speak that way, right? Because he's not ever looking to work for Republicans or Democrats. I happen to have loved Chris Wallace, but I think a lot of Fox people thought that he wasn't right enough, and they were happy to get rid of him.
Yeah. Listen, James Breslo, you are the host of the Hidden Truth Show podcast. You're also an attorney. You're one of those commentators who goes on all the time, and I think you speak your mind and you're very honest, and you certainly were with us here on this edition of The Analyst. So much more to talk to you about. We really didn't get to foreign policy, but maybe we'll do that next, because I think this was the most foreign policy laden acceptance speech I've ever seen at a convention. I mean, Donald Trump really walked across the map of the globe a couple of times, something that you usually only see in a State of the Union, but that's for another time. James, thank you so much for joining us, and thank everyone else for joining us on this edition of The Analyst. Again, you got to keep watching all these episodes, because things change. A year's worth of events happen between episodes. So please join us again on our next edition, and maybe we'll have a new president the next time we speak, even though that might only be in a few days. Thanks again for joining us. Again, I'm Jake Novak. We'll talk to you next time.